in this presentation, I'm going to talk about non-probability sampling designs. Now, as you know, probability sampling is when we can estimate or enumerate the likelihood of an individual being in your sample. That likelihood of being selected to be in your sample, when we're able to compute it, is only possible when we know the population and the dynamics of the population from which they're being selected. If we cannot estimate that, then we cannot, if you go back to the definition of a sampling distribution, we cannot define the sampling distribution from which these individuals were selected. And if we cannot develop or design or presume that they come from a normally distributed sampling distribution, then we cannot compute the confidence intervals or the confidence levels. In other words, we cannot in any way know whether we represented or misrepresented the population. It would be impossible to detect it because we don't know the sampling frame. We can never presume that they come from a normally distributed sampling frame, right? Now, there are many different methodologies of doing this, and very often we are forced to use these methodologies, not because we want to, but because it's better to get some data than to have no data. Methodology is what is called as convenience sampling, also sometimes called accidental or haphazard sampling, right? Where you can go to the man on the street and ask them questions. Whoever you walk up and who's willing to participate, you ask them questions. Communication majors, psychology majors, college students are very commonly used because they're easier to utilize because they're subjects, they're at school, they're more willing to take surveys which have longer questions for grade and stuff, which you cannot essentially do in the real world of, let's say, working people, right? But it's a good place to test ideas and to validate them in a smaller scale before you go out and try to get them externally validated using real world samples, right? So you can do a study using whoever are the clients available. Let's say the people who are walking into a restaurant, you just ask them. These are all examples of convenience samples, volunteers and so on and so forth. Another form of sampling is called modal instance sampling. Modal instance sampling is where you sample for the typical case, right? This is different from just a convenience sample where you go and just ask anybody who's willing to participate. Here you look for people who fit a certain psychographic or certain characteristic that you're interested in. So let's say you're on campus, you want to do a study about addiction. Let's say it's online gambling addiction. You can recruit people who are on campus, college students, by putting out flyers and say, hey, if you are a gambler, if you are playing online, or playing online poker or what have you, please participate in a study. Now, if you go through campus, you see a lot of these posters for different studies that people are doing, and what they're basically doing is what is called as a modal instance sampling. The problem again is, you don't know if that modal instance, that modal group that you selected of young individuals, college-age students who do online gambling, is representative of the larger population of online gamblers out there. That's something you cannot estimate, and therefore you cannot generalize those results to all online gamblers, right? You could use an expert sample, and an expert sampling is either you use a group of experts themselves or you use the experts to judge the validity of your sample. So you can use a group of experts who say, most gamblers are college students and therefore your sample is representative. So they give you their judgment helps you support the validity of your sampling and the validity of generalizing those results to the larger population. Another form of non-probability sampling is quota sampling, right? Quota sampling, here what you're doing is you're very similar to stratified random sampling. You're selecting people non-randomly according to some quotas. Now, what could those quotas be? Those quotas could be proportional quotas, they could be non-proportional quotas, but they could be theoretical ideas. So maybe, let's go back to the study about online gambling. You're doing online gambling study on college campus, and you're saying, I need to make sure that 50% of the people who participate in my modal instance sampling methodology are male and 50% are female. So you set a quota and you say, I'm going to recruit 50 males, 50 females. That's a proportional quota. It could be non-proportional. You could say, hey, results seem to suggest that 80% of online gamblers are male, 20% are female. In other words, I want 80% of my sample that I'm going to get using whatever recruitment methodologies are convenient or possible or available. I'm going to get 80 males and 20 females. That's called quota sampling. You could also use what is called as a snowball sampling methodology. You can recruit a few people who are online gamblers and say, hey, you guys gamble, can you find me other, let's say, your friend or somebody who you gamble with, who are the people who are playing with you on a regular basis. So one person gives you another person, gives you another person, and that way you get what is called as a snowball of participants in your study. Again, this is a great methodology that is used when you're studying hard to reach populations. So if you're looking for, let's say, homeless people, we don't know what the population of homeless people are out there, right? It's very hard to estimate that population completely. So there really is no sampling frame that you can randomly draw from. So you may, come up with one or two or three people who are, you go to a soup kitchen and maybe, start talking to some of them and you say, hey, can you get me a few more people to participate in my study? You could do this for a lot of these hard to reach populations or difficult groups to study. Finally, you can use what is called as a heterogeneity sampling methodology. Now, let's say you're interested in that online gambling study we talked about, and you have access to college-age students. You may say, what, I don't want it to only be males or females. I also want it to be males and females from every ethnic group. So you want to make sure that you include all different groups in your study. So, you almost like put a quota up like we did in quota sampling, where we say, we're going to have different ethnic groups and different combinations of males and females for each ethnic group. So I want heterogeneity in my sample. Or I want to make sure that I have freshmen, I want seniors, I want juniors, I want every group, I want graduate students. So you can have some kind of heterogeneity in your sample, and you may want to have enough people so every major group in your study is represented.